So we got another 80 MGB in the shop. Of course, this one's not an LE and it's not like super low mileage car. It's just a normal MGB, but this one's got some wiring problems. This is actually a car I might have worked on something like 8 or so years ago for a previous owner, but I don't remember what I did to it then. But the current owner had put a new radio in and a USB adapter instead of a cigarette lighter there. And then he went to go drive it and let all the smoke out of the wiring harness. And boy, did he ever. Now, what I'm trying to do is figure out exactly what he actually did and what it's connected to the radio. Other than the white and green wire should be the radio wire, but that's an awful big meltdown for just the radio wire. So we're gonna have to get the dash out of this thing and see if there's any other wires melted back in behind the dash. But in order to put a harness in, which is what we're gonna end up doing on this car, at least a main harness, the dash has to come out anyway. So I'm starting to tear things apart. We got the console taken out. Now, I wanted to show you one no-no, big no-no here. Wire nuts. Don't use those on cars. They're fine for your house, but not for automotive applications. One reason why is, see this? As far as I know, these were actually hooked up to something under here before I took that out, but by the time I got the cables disconnected and it pulled away, it's just laying here, not connected to anything at all. But there's no place in a car for these at all. Don't use them. And I see it all the time. Since I am dealing with a car that has light tan carpet, I went ahead and put some towels down here to make sure that as I'm crawling up underneath here, that I've got nothing on the back of my shirt or anything that might stain the carpet. It'll get on my towels instead, because I don't want to put any stains in the carpet that weren't already there. Now there's nuts all the way across the back here that are a little difficult to get to, and the screws across the bottom. And then you got to, of course, disconnect the dash harness from the main harness. Now I didn't show you me stuck under there trying to get to all this stuff. I've shown that before on this channel, but it should be pretty much loose now. And what happens is I must have one, yeah. What happens is these nuts, these washers here get stuck and they won't come off. Then you have to really kind of shake it to get it to pop loose from these to get it to actually come out. And then of course you have good armor cable here that you can't take off until you get this far. And then you also have the oil pressure gauge here that you have to take off once you get to this point. Now, I do understand that somebody's going to say in the comment section, no, you can take the line off with the dash in place. Absolutely, you can. But I think it's a little bit easier to do at this point because you just have more access to swing a wrench. So now when we get this thing out of here, we'll need to take a really good look at all of these wires. Make sure nothing in here is actually burnt. There's a good chance nothing is, because it looks like it was probably all just within the main harness. And with these late cars, 77 and later, this isn't necessarily super uncommon. There's one brown wire here that'll tend to melt down all the way across and then melt other wires together. And that's usually due to just corrosion in the connections creating a lot of resistance. And it's something that's pretty specific to the 77 through end of production cars. And that usually doesn't burn any of this stuff up. But I think by a cursory look that we're going to be okay with this. So that'll save him some money. He won't have to buy this section of the harness. So I went ahead and just pulled this up above the crossbar here, and I found we got a wire here that's just hanging loose. Now this wire goes down to the yellow wire for the radio, which should be the memory. So this actually should be hooked to a constant 12-volt source, such as purple or brown wire. The brown ones would be unfused, purple ones would be fused. But I don't know where this would have been hooked at. Looks like it might have been stuffed up into a connector somewhere. And when I pulled something apart, it may have just fell out. So that's not a good way to do it either. We'll fix this up and do it right as I put it all back together. Now at this point, take the time to look at how all this stuff is run through here. Take note that it's running behind the demisters for the windshield, above the fresh air vents, and it's got this rubber tie here that ties it to the windshield wiper mechanism. So you want to take note of all that as it goes through here. And you can see there's some burnt wiring there. It's burnt through here, here, crossed here. So when these things burn down and crossed here, it usually is showing through multiple places along there. So that's why I never recommend replacing or just trying to repair it, because there'll be other damage along the harness. So one of the interesting things about working on some year cars, like this is a 1980, there's actually 3 wiring harnesses shown for a North American 1980 car. And according to the VIN number, this car is like 22 cars after they changed the wiring harness. And the change was the fuel cutoff switch here, the inertia switch. They changed that, so the wiring to that's different. So I need to, and since it's so close to that changeover, I need to double check that, to look at the connectors and everything to make sure it is the later one, to know for sure whether I buy the later harness or the one just before for it to actually fit. And in this case, this doesn't look any different to me than all the earlier ones, but I don't remember, or I don't think I've ever actually seen the connectors for the last version. So I'll have to do a little bit of research before I order the harness to make sure I'm getting the right connectors. So in order to do this, you do need to take the wiper motor out, or at least take it loose. It's so much easier because the wiring goes right behind it and then goes through the firewall there. And there's a ground wire up here that this thing's pretty much directly under. What I like to do, take all the wipers off and just pull it out. Well, gotta get the ground wire loose. So what happens when you get on camera, you start trying to get things done and forget something like this. Still do it, even though I've been doing this for a few years. But once you get that loose, just go ahead and pull this thing out and get it out of the way. Because this has to come through here, and it's so much easier to pull this out here and feed it through and to feed it back in, or to pull the other out, whichever way you decide to go with it. So now we got to disconnect everything under the bonnet. From the headlights, it goes all the way across under the headlights. You got to take this or the front grill out. All the way back here, everything from the alternator, starter, coil, all the relays. And then there's a wire that goes across here to the washer pump, heater, all the way across here, all the way over to the brake light switch, and the low pressure warning light for the brakes, and the transmission solenoid and all that. Everything has to be disconnected here because the wiring harness is everything from the headlights to the connector on the dash. Well, now I got all of the stuff unhooked throughout the engine compartment, except for the starter. I got to get the car up in the air to get underneath there to get the starter loose. Then I can start pulling all the wiring through. Now, you could go ahead and, if you know you're not going to keep the wiring harness for any reason whatsoever, and you're just going to throw it in the trash, you could literally come in here and just cut it off right here somewhere, and it'll be a lot easier to pull through the firewall. But if you want to try to save it because you want to like keep bits and pieces for repairs for something else you own, or because you help other people out on their cars, and you want to keep it all completely intact, you just take your time and push it through that way, because the connectors underneath the dash are way bigger than any of the connections underneath the bonnet here. So it's a lot easier to take it through that way, and installing the new one coming through this way. But take your time with it. Sometimes you got to take these wires and pull them backwards and pull that through first and then come through, or sometimes you have to let them go that way, and it takes a little bit of time to work it out and get it through there without damaging the wiring harness, especially when putting the new one in. Because if you get a little too froggy and try to push it through too hard and too fast, you can rip this covering on it, and then that won't look very good, and you could potentially damage some wires. So take your time with it. So if you do plan on taking a major wiring harness project on, or even major repairs to your own wiring harness, I would suggest going with the Bentley manual over the Haynes manual. Now, I will say there is also online sources for exploded view drawings that are all color-coded and all that available too, and I can't really say a lot about them because I only have a couple of those laying around. I generally use the Bentley manuals myself. And the reason why I say that is the Haynes manuals are more general wiring diagrams. Like in this case here, typical wiring diagram for late North American cars. Well, they're covering 1975 through 80 in this wiring diagram. Now, in this one, there's a 75, two different 75 wiring diagrams, 76, 78, well, with converter and without converters, 78, and a 77 supplemental. Now, in the case of the 77 with the supplemental, I have yet to work on a 77 where it works out with just the 76 wiring diagram and the 77 supplemental like they say in the book. I've always had to dig into the 78 wiring diagram for one or two of the circuits because they never match up to the 76, whether it's a replacement harness or an original. Now on the chrome bumper cars, I can tell you 1970, there's two different wiring harnesses, and then 69 is a different, but in this book they say 69 and 70 is all one harness. Now I've had to use the two different 70 wiring harness wiring diagrams out of the Bentley manual to install a 70 wiring harness, because it seems the replacement wiring harness is kind of a melding of the two rather than showing two separate ones. From what I can tell, when I did the one, I had to use both wiring diagrams to actually put that one in. So the more information you had to work with, the better off you are, and I do not believe these give quite enough information. So one of the other projects we've got in the shop right now is this TR7. Now I'm not actually working on it, I'm just overseeing the work being done to it to make sure it gets done the way it needs to be. But that same teenager that has the red GT, this is his other car. So he goes back and forth between the two cars. So this thing had a bit of a coolant leak that was either coming out from around here and running down, or it was out of the lid here for the water pump. So what we're doing is we're putting a whole new gasket here, new O-ring, and a new gasket here. Now, of course, this gasket does require you to do some feeler gauge work and shim it to get the right thickness gasket, and we've already done that. We're right within specs. And while he's in here, we got him cleaning up the engine compartment a bit, because this is actually a very low mileage car. It's only showing 31,000 miles, but the engine compartment was surprisingly dirty for the mileage, partly because it had a major oil leak out of here. That bolt wasn't even finger tight. It was just kind of loose in there. And since it has had a electric conversion for the fuel pump, I went ahead and made up a blanking plate to put there since we don't need that thing hanging there anymore. And he's painting everything up, cleaning it up. And we're going to make this engine compartment look as close to the true mileage on the car as we can get it. And we're also going back to the Stromberg carburetors, because this did have the Webers on it, and he's never liked the way it drove with the Webers and the gas mileage that it got. And the fact that the throttle never felt right. And I can make the Strombergs work, so we're going back to that.